buenos dias. It's Tia Juana, and I am here today with Chris Cuervo, who currently lives in Dallas but has lived all over the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about that with her. I met Chris because she was doing meditation and awareness and getting her master's degree in that after spending like how many years in corporate America? Did you
13.
say 13? I was going to say 10, but it was 13. You don't look old enough to have 13 years with corporate America. And she decided that something was missing. And she's also written two books that are especially for Latinos to increase our awareness, to increase our presence, to increase our ability to be good leaders. So, Chris, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. And this is a Sunday morning, so we're going to be doing some meditation together and really practicing some of the principles that you teach. So, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Juana. So happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to do this. And yeah, it's an honor to share a little bit of what I've learned on the way. So
Well,
thank you.
let's start. You have kind of an interesting history. Your parents are from Colombia, right?
Mhm.
But you were born in Venezuela. You've spent time in Spain and in South America. So tell us a little bit about your origin story, about your parents and how you ended up coming to the United States at a young age.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think a lot of people can probably connect to my story. But yeah, so my dad actually, when I was 15, had the opportunity to work in the US. So we came to the United States, and yeah, since I was 15, I've lived here in the US. But then life has started to take me other places. I never in my life, when I was growing up in Venezuela, as the daughter of immigrants, Colombian immigrants that went to this country that it was rich back in the day, had a lot of opportunities. And
What
so
a change, right?
yeah, so my dad, went to Venezuela, and had an amazing career, and then he had the opportunity to come to the US. So yeah, so when I was working, I also had the opportunity to also try and do some jumps here and there. I spent some time in Mexico. I didn't work there, but I just spent some time with my family there. My dad was living and working in Mexico for a while, so I decided to go there and be with them for a little bit.
So you kind of had an international childhood.
Yeah, so I was very exposed, and that's something that I always talk about with my husband and my nieces and nephews. Is an early age, I think I was always very exposed to different cultures, different ways of thinking, different ways of living, and also seeing people that were married an older ages, people that were married without kids, people that were, divorced or remarrying. Like I was exposed to many, different religious beliefs,
Well,
cultural
I do want to
beliefs.
say, since
Yeah,
you're a millennial, right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm in like right there in the
When's your
between.
birthday? I mean, when were
I'm
you born?
82.
Yeah, yeah, you're right there. And millennials want to see the world. They really are global in not only in their culture because their music and their entertainment and their political views even reach across countries, but they want to travel. So as a young
Yeah.
person, you got an opportunity to do that ahead of time, which was really pretty amazing.
Yes,
What was it like
very
to come to the
grateful.
United States at 15?
It's, when you're 15, you don't have a grasp of, like for me, I kind of felt like I was gonna live in Disney World, my whole life. So that's what I knew, that's what I had seen of the United
That's
States.
so interesting because that's really true. People in South America, they all want to go to Disney World.
Well, I used to come to Disney World and some of the summers. So that was my image. That was the picture that I had. That it was this things that you see on television. But it was
Wait,
actually
wait, who's your favorite Disney character?
a Mickey Mouse, of course.
Oh, I was going to say Minnie Mouse, but of
Minnie
course that's old school. Now they have so many new ones, with all
Yeah.
the difference. But yeah, I have pictures of me with my kids with Minnie Mouse.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy how you have like this vision of how things are, but then when you arrive, and actually it was for the best. So I, coming here in my life completely like I was so excited about the future. You know, when you are growing up in a country like, you know, like Venezuela and where I was growing up, the environment where I was growing up, you didn't see, even though I was exposed to a lot of cultural diversity, I wasn't exposed to a lot. There were very few women that had like positions of roles that I admire. It was mostly like the news anchors that I saw, like, you know, of course, the Miss Venezuelas, you know, you know, it's something that we're, you know, known for. So that was where you saw women in positions that you're like, oh my God, I want to get there. I want to do that.
Well, so you were able to see in the United States a kind of an elevated women's movement that doesn't exist
Yes.
as much in South America. Of course, it might have changed some since you left, because now we have a Mexican woman president of Mexico, so
Yes.
we're making some progress. So it kind of upped your aspirations of what you could do as a Hispanic female.
Right. It opened my eyes. Like it kind of like my eyes were open to a world that I kind of had some access to, you know, but I wasn't, you know, I wasn't part of. So I became part of this world where they were asking me questions in high school, like, where do you want to go to college? You know, I knew I always wanted to go to college, but then I was like, and then what? You know, there were very few opportunities to work. You could go to college, you know, most people would plan to go to college, but then the job market wasn't, you know, even though it was a country that was at that time somewhat stable and very ahead of the other countries in Latin America, you still there was a kind of like grayish thing to see where am I going to go, you know, what
Well,
am I
let me
going to
ask you this, because how do you identify? That's also a really important thing to young people, to have this intersectionality, because of your background and where you've lived, and that your parents were from one country and you were born in another. When people say, "How do you identify? Who are you?" What do you say?
You know, and that's the question that I heard my dad say once because he used to travel a lot around Latin America when he worked, and of course he moved to Venezuela when he was younger, and then he moved to the United States when he was in his 40s, like late 40s. So he has been, you know, transitioning his whole life. So I heard him once said, "I am a citizen of the world."
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, I like that, you know, because sometimes people ask me, where are you from? And I've been, you know, I have been a citizen, like I feel very American since I was, you know, since I moved here. So it's 26 years now. So it's like, where am I from? You know, like I was born. So I have to tell you, do you want the short or do you want the long answer? Because, you know, the short, yeah, I can say, yeah, I live in Dallas, but I live there. Am I from there? So it's a very, it can get very, very deep, you know, if you really want to, you know, get into it. But sometimes, you know, just, you know, to make it easier, you know, for me to feel really that I can put everything that I haven't had in my life in one sentence, I can just say I'm a citizen of the world.
Right. Well, that kind of fits with your generation. Although I would say that because of your where you were born and your culture and so forth, you'd have to say with a Latina flavor. You'd have to add something about that, because a citizen of the world can be from almost anywhere, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
and it's something that also I carry with myself, very, you know, very close to my heart. You know, and I think, you know, the citizen of the world is meaning that I, you know, I carry who I am everywhere I go. You know, and who I am, it's of course a Latin American, someone that, you know, like has my ancestors, everyone is from, you know, from South America. So, and I carry my culture, you know, and that's something that I learned also from my, you know, from my family and in my own life. It's like doesn't matter where I live. When I lived in Spain, when I lived in Mexico, when I lived, you know, different places throughout the United States, I carry my culture. Like I make arepas, I, you know, celebrate, you know, in Christmas, you know, like always the 24th is like the biggest celebration, you know, we dance and we celebrate and we always like food is so important. Like food is Venezuelan food is always present, you know, in any holiday celebration, even Thanksgiving, there is Venezuelan food. And even Colombian. I still have some of the Colombian, you know, my parents are Colombian. And then we lived in Mexico. So some of the Mexican things started to join the table.
yeah,
And then
well,
I,
that's in this series we're interviewing women from Dominican Republic, from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, Venezuela, and so it's really important for people to understand understand that Latinos are really everywhere, but South and Central America is our homelands, and as well as the Southwest of the United States. Well, once you got here, you got a job in corporate America, and after 13 years, you said, "Wow, this isn't for me." And tell me how the light went on that you should go ahead and start helping people become aware and learn to meditate and get centered and really have a more fulfilled life.
Yeah, I wanted, as I said, the vision of a woman making an impact in the world for me was being a news anchor. I wanted to be a news anchor, so I kind of like followed that path. But now I'm in a new country. I don't speak English. I speak with an accent. So I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this in America? How am I going to do this in the United States? So I started to, I definitely got into the television industry, but I did many, many roles, mostly around operations, sales. I did some production too. And yeah, it was amazing to be in there to see, how television works, how everything is made. But then I started to, the behind all of that, there was this purpose. What am I going to do? How I can be the voice for others, how I can help others. So throughout the journey, I kind of, got lost in the work and every day and the achieving, that we all get lost and trying to advance in a corporate career. I did get, I didn't get to super, super high senior levels, but I did get, to a role that I was very, comfortable, that I was able to travel all over the US, that I was very happy at where I was at. And I had an amazing team of colleagues. But what was happening when I was traveling throughout the United States and sometimes in Mexico, I used to visit like people that own small businesses, small, medium, and large businesses that were Latinos. And when I visit them, I will be like, and so I would ask a lot of questions. I will build relationships with them. And in this process, you're building human relationships. So sometimes I had to go back to corporate and talk about why this account in I don't know, in Minnesota is not performing or it's not doing their sales numbers. And then I would remember my conversation that I had with this person, and this person was telling me that they were going through a divorce or they're going through some things at home or their kid is sick or their parent's sick. And it just kept happening because we're humans.
Right.
So we have lives and things happen. So I kept seeing that top salespeople will be underperforming, and I will come up to them and be like, what's going on, and trying to see if I can train them, right? And then, of course, I was approaching them to train them in hard skills, how to sell and how to, do these techniques, and it wasn't working. And I'm like, this is not working. That, my techniques, sales techniques and hard skills, how I call them, are not helping. And so I started to do that basically sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes what was blocking people from being their best selves, it was the soft skills, which I didn't know exactly what it entailed. But I was starting to discover it for myself because I started to do my own digging. So I started to do my own processes, reading everything that I could read in the self-care section and some of the psychology, and just like trying to learn anything that I could about the inner part of the human experience.
Well, and I want to relate this to leadership because we've talked a lot about that and how leadership begins with the leader, with the self. Personalismo, what kind of a person are you? And a lot of us have been stressing to take care of yourself first, because you can't be a good leader if you don't really have that awareness and that presence and the ability to give. Because, if you're out of data, if you're totally wasted, you can't be a good leader.
Yeah. So I started my own work, and actually one day, in my own time, and one day I had a trip, and I met with my team, which we were very close. And one of the leaders asked, Chris, what are you doing? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, you look different. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, oh my, people are noticing something. Like, so I was like, okay. So slowly I started to bring in some of what I was learning into what I was doing. And then there's a point that I said, something has to change, something has to shift. I really want to. This is something that I have to do. I have to go and share with the world. And I actually have to get formal training. I cannot go and mess and then try to help and be helping people and not have any type of training. So I decided to step aside from the corporate career, go back to school. I did a master's degree. It took me like 3 years. In that journey, I met you.
Right, right. And tell them what your master's degree is in.
Yeah, so a master's degree in mindfulness studies.
Isn't
Yes.
that interesting, folks? Mindfulness studies. Who
Yeah.
who would have guessed that we would need this, but we do.
Yes, and it's been something that it's been around for more than 2,500 years.
Yeah,
And
right,
you
right.
know, there has never been, the thing, this was one of the first programs in the United States. Now I think there is a couple of them out there. But yeah, so I, completely different from, I went to school to study communications. And then I was doing, I started to do a master's in journalism, and so completely changed the path. So relearn many things, relearn the way I was also formatted and thought that things should be. So I had to do a lot of work. It was
Well,
three
give us
years.
some examples of work that people can think about and start doing that you
Yeah.
know
So I,
there.
I think the first step, it's to become self-aware that there's something that has to shift. Right? If we think we're fine and we're perfect and everything is working, so why, but there, there's not going to be this opening to for growth, right? But if we see that that's something in the way our life is moving, personal and professional, or either, and we see that something, there has to be another way. There has to be a way to be able to manage family, personal time, to feel balanced, to feel in harmony. Not balance, because there's not such thing as like a balance. There's more harmony, to be in harmony, and to feel that you can cope with the troubles of the world and your own, because the life is full of bumps, and things never go the way that we want them to go, right? And we're not prepared. So people, so we are, life doesn't, nobody teaches us skills. So I think the first thing that, I would say, I would recommend a book, perhaps, to start reading and learning, and exploring. One of the first books that I read, so many books, but there's some great books by Sharon Salzberg, that is about starting to meditate. So meditation can be, and I would say that meditation is something that now everyone is talking about. But if you're gonna be a tennis player, you have to take tennis lessons, right? If you're going to be a soccer, you have to play soccer, or somebody has to teach you soccer. So I think sometimes taking the time to learn from someone that has done the preparation to learn the skill of meditation. So I did read a lot of books, and then of course I embarked on my master's degree.
Well, I also have to share that if people go on YouTube, there's all kinds of meditation practices that they can use. I use YouTube a lot. And Lavendier is the one that I listen to. She has 20-minute, 10-minute, 5-minute meditations. We'll put those up on the website after
Okay.
this interview. But I think you're right. It's practice. Practice, practice, practice. You can't learn it unless you try it, unless you do it. And I also wanted to say it's not necessarily some of the leaders we talk to that have a meditation practice and have, like I am also a yogi, I do yoga. Um, it's not really that things are not working for me. It's how do I get in tune with something greater than myself, and how do I get in tune with the inner self that really knows more than the outer self. So it's really a spiritual journey as well. So for some of our women that go like, well, my life is working pretty well. Yes, it might be, but what's the next level for you, and how can you really be sure that you're following your intuition, that you're following your inner self, and that you're really on target as far as putting your gifts into what you're doing. So it's both. It's both for when you have stress and to manage your stress, but it's also so that you can be centered and ready for the next level.
Yes, I agree completely. I think meditation can be supportive in many, many ways. So I think if you, the more you practice, the same with any sport, you get to, you get to be, very good at what you're doing. So with meditation, you can get to, states where you can be the best version of yourself, because you can be more creative, more innovative, more strategic, because you're allowing the space, you're giving yourself the space to do these type of things. So sometimes we as leaders, and I work with many leaders, and sometimes, and then there's a saying, and I can't remember exactly who said it, but sometimes the leader's cup is full. So there's so much going on that sometimes what they need is a little bit of stillness to allow all the things and all the knowledge and all the things to just come together. So sometimes these moments of pause and stillness can be moments of reflection, and the big, huge ideas can happen. Like Steve Jobs used to go for walks, and to help him, kind of like ground himself and see, kind of like see the bigger vision. So how are we finding those times? So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Sometimes meditation can be used as a way to cope with anxiety, with stress, and with many things that are proved by the science, but also as an enhancer of how can I be a better leader, a better human, a better person, and just as a support. Because in our culture we have, sadly, and this is like a stereotype, but it's sadly the ways that how do we cope with with life. Usually we go out and we, people are like, oh, let's get drunk, I broke up with me, and that's the way, I'm going to cope with it. And how do we cope when things go, get difficult, or when life happens, and when you are in leadership positions, and you have to lay off a lot of people, like how do we cope with all those things? So sometimes we don't have tools to help us make better decisions, to so that's why many leaders nowadays are going into first start finding research-based tools that can help them in many aspects of leadership.
Well, before we get into practicing a little meditation, because I asked Chris to do that for us, I do want to say that you said something that I think is really important to consider, and that is that that life is difficult at times. That's the first precept of Buddhism: is life is difficult. And I think particularly now, I was just looking at a book about the anxious generation, or the fact that the younger people aren't finding this sense of self, and this sense, that they have a lot of anxiety because of the way the world is, but also because they say that millennials got a lot of prizes for things, and they were helicopter parents that were protecting them, and this. But the truth of the matter is that it's normal for your life to have ups and downs. That's how we grow. That's how we learn. If everything was always perfect, we wouldn't be here. Number one, but number two, we wouldn't have anything that we were working on to grow and learn. And that's really the purpose of life: is growing, learning, expanding yourself. And so, yeah, life is difficult, and at times you need your tools. And the other thing is that you need to do them every day, because when the crisis comes, it's too late.
Yeah, and it's and
You got to be able to take a deep breath,
right.
and say,
sometimes
don't
people
sweat the
think,
small stuff and keep moving.
yeah, and sometimes people think that someone that if I am a meditation teacher and I am a mindfulness guide, but it doesn't mean that I'm like in a state of meditation, and I'm like I don't speak up for when things are not just, or I don't and we can talk about the work that I'm doing now, but you know being someone that is a yogi, or practicing meditation or practicing mindfulness, um it's a way of self-care, and it can happen in many ways. Doesn't mean, some people can meditate walking, some people can meditate sitting, some people can meditate laying down. So meditation is just a mind training. There are many types of meditation. There are many that you can find out there. So sometimes you have to also find which one is the one that works for you, or it kind of helps you get where you want to get. Are you do so? So going back to what you were saying, Juana, why do I want to meditate? Do I want to be a better leader? Do I want to cope with things in life? Do I want to manage stress? Do I want to manage anxiety? Why do I want to meditate? And there are meditations for each type of those things. Maybe, and there's even meditations that a lot of leaders are doing, which is self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Like being, taking care of ourselves, because, when you are, sometimes we can be very demanding to ourselves, right? So how can we be better friends to ourselves? And that's something that we actually have to learn how to do, because it's something that we're not taught, to do from a young age.
Well, and I also think that life is so fast now. There's so much change and so much stress. I mean, just getting on the freeway in Dallas or Denver, where I live, not to mention some of the other cities. So that's another thing, is just that we live in very complicated times. I can remember my grandmother just sitting there and listening, or I don't know what she was doing, but she was quiet and she would sit. And I think we also had more time to converse and to just to be more human. Whereas today we're constantly on the move and running from one thing to another. Well, what about if we take a little time for you to guide us in some meditation and then come back and find out some of the great things you've been doing with the talents that you learned? So if
Yes.
everybody can take a deep breath and stay with us, because this is going to be really great 4 minutes.
Yeah. So I'm going to invite you right now, and I'm going to shift the way that I'm sitting too, just to put my both feet on the ground. And this is a meditation. Meditation is not about being rigid. And meditation is just trying to find a moment to connect with your body, your mind, and your heart. And this type of meditation that we're going to do, we're going to do just like a short breath meditation. And this is one that really helps us feel centered and just grounded and present in this moment, because as Juana said, sometimes we can find ourselves distracted by many, many, many things. And so let's see if this helps us to be here. So I invite you to right now, if you feel comfortable, you can close the eyes or relax the gaze down. If you're relaxing the gaze down, just finding a place where you can just keep your sight there in a relaxed way. And I'm going to close my eyes. And I invite you just for a moment to just feel your body here in this moment where you are sitting. Feel the chair where you're sitting, or if you're standing, feel the ground underneath, and go down to your feet and see if you can move your toes a little bit. Just wiggle the toes. And allow slowly the feet to be grounded fully on the surface where you are. Let's take a deep breath. Inhale deeply. And exhale through the mouth. One more time. Inhale. And exhale through the mouth. We all have different capacities of the deep breathing. So just one more time at your own rhythm. Take a deep breath. Inhale. And exhale. I'm going to invite you for a moment to see if you can place your right hand on your stomach. And it's okay if you're getting distracted. That's completely normal to get distracted, with thoughts or maybe noises. But just take this moment. It's going to be a short practice. So place the hand on the stomach and just allowing your breath to be natural. It's normal to trying to control the breath. But right now, we just want to follow the movement of our stomach as if lifting and going in and out as you're breathing. Make sure you're checking your shoulders. Let them drop. You can make slight adjustments. Allow the muscles to release any tension in the shoulders. And this may need you to just make movements. Maybe move a little bit, very kind, slow movements to allow the shoulders to drop, so you can bring your attention to the breath in your stomach, your hand on your stomach, and just feeling how the body breathes. And if it helps, You can say, breathing in as you see the air and feel the air lifting your stomach. And then breathing out, you say that in silence to yourself, just for a few seconds, followed by saying that breathing in as you breathe in and breathing out as you breathe out, as it lifts and then falls. Breathing in and breathing out. And slowly starting to relax the hands, letting them be on your lap. And start to move the body a little bit. Just listen, it will tell you how to move. Sometimes it's moving the head side to side. Very kind movements, the head back and forward. And maybe roll the shoulders back. Very kind movements, just allowing the body to let it know that we're returning our attention to where we are in this moment. So opening the eyes if you close them, and returning your attention. Thank you.
Well, that was nice. I hope everybody got a moment of centering there. You know, I used to teach a little bit of meditation. I would put on music in my classes, and I would have people do mudras, which are how you put your fingers like this. And in biofeedback training, they say if you keep doing this, then when you're going to walk into a meeting or have to get onto a Zoom or talk to your teenage daughter about what the rules are, or have a conversation with your neighbor about the dog that was barking last night, you put your two fingers together and it immediately puts you into this state. So that's the other great thing about practicing, is that once you learn how to do that, then when you're in a tense situation, you can just take these deep breaths and get centered again. And that's so important. You know, there's a saying in leadership, lead others, but manage yourself. And that's so important for us to be able to be centered and to come from the best place instead of letting our emotions run rampant,
Yeah.
So that's real important. Well, Chris, I really love that. But you also have done your book. Tell me how you say the title.
Pertenecer.
Pertenecer. Oh, what a long word. And it really focuses in more on Latinos and meditation, as well as the article you wrote on approaches for Latinos. Tell me what's important, what's the lens on Latinos and centering and being able to be focused and ready for action, I think, is really what happens when you do this.
I was looking to find a way to bring some of the colors of our culture into this very ancient practice. So I found you, Juana, and I found your work, and I found, the book Salsa, Soul and Spirit, also Latino Leadership, and I read through them, and I started to see so many connections, to the depth of the importance that leadership highlights on self-care, and then the connections of the work that I was doing in the work that, of studying mindfulness. So I started to see so many places where the practice of meditation and mindfulness can stay intact, but they can be enhanced. So our culture and our community can find more connection to them. So the book is basically talking about all the things that I've learned throughout my 3 years of studying mindfulness, and then my own, research, and how we can integrate that into our lived experiences as immigrants. And also in the practices, I kind of added things like how to do mindful dancing, how to do mindful cooking, how to have like mindful engagement with social media, so just talk about more real
things. I have to tell people that mindfulness, we have a saying for it, and it's ponle ojo, pay attention.
Yeah.
Really be present, because this multitasking idea is really very hard to do. And so what I hear you saying is that once you practice mindfulness, you can bring that to all your activities, including working out. But it's really just paying attention so that you're focused, And I like to use the idea of, you can have a light bulb, that's light, but if you have a laser that's also light, it can cut through matter because it's so focused. And
Right.
so leaders have to have that sense of focus, because if you're not focused and you don't have that sense of, okay, right now I'm going to lead the best meeting I've ever led, or I'm going to have the best sales pitch I ever had, or I'm going to do the best on this test that I ever could ever do because I'm so focused and I'm so prepared. And that's just a leadership trait, to be able to do that, because then you're going to do your best, really, and you're going to do it con ganas and with
Of
the
course, all
yeah,
those, yeah,
it's a
all of those,
totally different thing.
yeah, they come into play, and then they're so valuable. And I think, what the Buddhists and the people that are, the that wrote about this 2,500 years ago, what they added in it, I think in somewhere in this 2,500 years they have gotten lost, is that, yeah, we can have this focused tunnel vision, but then we also have to have here on this side the curiosity, and here on this side the kindness. And what I mean is that, because you can be, and my husband is a surgeon, so I always tell him, you can be, and then they always put examples of surgeons in the surgery room, right? So you can be operating with all this stiffness and like all this rigidity and like, like I have to, or you can be operating in a zone of flow, right?
Right, go with the flow. That's what they say, right?
In a state of flow, right? The state of flow where you are doing amazing. You're laser focused, but you are with this attitude of curiosity and then kindness, that you are doing, that you are confident about what you're doing in this moment, right? And that's, and so sometimes we have to distinct that. So, because mindfulness in itself, the definition is being present, being in the present moment with curiosity and kindness, right? And how do we, when we're engaging as leaders, if we really want to be there and like really like tell me what's going on, really I want to learn what's happening, I'm really curious about this. And then we all have that voice, right? This inner critic, and it's demanding, and and I think, if you I was reading Andre Agassi is a tennis player. One of his books, and he talks about this inner critic that he had. It was so big that he was afraid to lose, a Grand Slam, and to lose. And so sometimes what drove him to win the U.S. Open, the Wimbledon, all these, it was fear. Imagine how powerful it can be. And so for me, it's like, how can you get to those stages but not led by fear?
Well, I do think I remember in my career at a certain point, I think that for Latinas to get where we got, to be able to get into leadership roles, we do have to just push ourselves. I mean, I would not have made it out of the barrio unless I worked really hard. But in my 30s, I had this realization that that no longer was serving me, that I had quote unquote made it. We let's congratulate ourselves. We made it. We got our degree. We finished high school. We bought a home. We did so many things in business and so forth. And in our profession, we've been able to do some really amazing things as far as taking care of ourselves. But at some point, you just have to get that monkey off your back and say, I made it. I'm here. I now can relax. I can let go of the fear, and I can start coming from that place of compassion, that place of curiosity, and of self-love, really. I was saying, we have to look at ourselves as a work in progress, but also something really that was born in perfection, or born exactly the way we needed to be.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we don't work hard. It doesn't
No,
mean that we don't do the hard things, that we don't have the hard conversations, that we don't do the difficult. It does not mean that. It means that when things get hard, how am I talking to myself? What am I saying to myself when I made this mistake? What am I, what's happening in here? Am I being truly a cheerleader for myself? If I'm going, if my organization is going through a lot of structural changes, am I acknowledging that I'm going through these changes and this is difficult? Am I, and so you're still going to go and you're still going to make tough decisions. You're still going to have difficult conversations. All these things are going to happen, but how can they happen from a place of stillness versus a place of fear? Right? I can go on the right.
Fear, confusion, and also the idea of
Anxiety.
complexity where you're not sure
Right.
what you need to do.
Yeah.
This quote keeps coming to me because, I've studied servant leadership a lot. And Robert Greenleaf, who wrote the book on that, said that the intuition is the most reliable part of the leader, of the servant leader. And you can't listen to your intuition, which is the inner voice, if it's too noisy. It can't get in. so
Yeah.
so you do have inner wisdom, everyone, and that wisdom is inside yourself, but you can't hear it. And particularly for a leader to stop. And it's also a woman's trait. Women have been known to be very intuitive because we are connected to the heart. And so the whole idea in leadership is to come from a more centered place so that you can tap into that intuition, tap into your gifts, and take a moment. And it's fine to say, let me get back to you, so that you can reflect and think and integrate. And I think that really helps with doing the right thing and doing the right thing for people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Juana. Yes, the intuition is something that even as Latinas, I think and something that we nurture from a young age. And I think it's something that we have to continue nurturing. And in order to listen to it, if it's too noisy, and I'm repeating what you just said, but yes, if it's too noisy up here, how can you listen to this intuition that comes from your entire being? So you need to be in stillness and connect to this silence and this moments of pause and reflection, so that can arise. And the more you practice, the more you will naturally start to continue to arise and be there.
And it doesn't have to be an hour. It can be 5 minutes. It can be, just to take that moment of centering. And like I said, if you learn to do that, then you're going into a tough meeting or you have to do an exam of some sort, and you take a deep breath and you're centered again, because it's called biofeedback training, by the way, for people who don't know. This is a computer and you're training it. Okay, when I take a deep breath or when I stop for a moment, that's when I'm centered again. So it really does work. It really does work, just to stop for a minute, breathe, get into that place, and then act. Such a great thing. Anyway, tell us what you're doing now as we close out the interview, so we know how you're using this mindfulness. I know you've used it with young people, you've used it with corporate executives, you used it with teachers. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
Yeah. So it's been a journey, amazing. I've been able to work with so many amazing people, and I think there's a point that I do want to bring my actionable mindfulness into the world. And so I actually joined the Greater Good Science Center about 7 months ago, and they do amazing work. And in the department or the area where I'm at, it's called the Bridging Differences program, Bridging Differences. In this program, basically what it does, it mixes the science and storytelling, which is very important in our culture, storytelling, to help address the urgent issues that are happening in the US and the world right now, which is cultural and political, religious polarization. So we are so polarized.
The polarization of the world and our communities and our nation.
Yes. And so we are using science-based practices and, as I said, in storytelling.
So what's one science-based practice that you would be using?
Mindfulness. Yeah. So that's why so
you mean the research behind why it's so important to have a few moments of peace and quiet.
Right. So one of the
my mother always used to say that I just need some peace and quiet.
Yes. So one of the practices that is part of these science-based practices that are used to bridge differences, to bring people together, for people to understand each other beyond the differences, is mindfulness. Another practice is listening with compassion. Another practice is finding shared identities. And all of these practices have the research behind it. So it's amazing to see that institutions like this one are doing the bigger work, like transition, helping translate this heavy research findings into very practical ways that people can go out in the world and say, you know what, I'm doing this, and it's being studied and shown that it actually can help me and can help our world to be, more interconnected, to remember our common humanity, to remember that we're brothers and sisters, to go beyond these polarizations that are existing all over the world. So it's very meaningful. I am really, really excited about the work that we're doing there, and I invite you to check it out too.
Wonderful. Well, one of the things I was going to say is that these are very old practices. You've mentioned how long meditation, awareness. And by the way, when I was young, I did Sufi dancing. The Sufis, which is a religion from the Middle East, they actually use dancing as a way to connect with spirit. So next time you're dancing, think about that. You got the spirit, the spirit is among you. And it's such a great way to celebrate the divine. One last thing I was going to say is that, now with quantum physics, which is looking at the world or the universe as a system, a lot of the science is beginning to say, yes, things on the outside impact the inside, and things on the inside impact the outside, because we really are one. We live in a quantum field. And so that's a little bit heavy, but that's exactly where humanity needs to go, to realize that universe means one verse, one song, one word, oneness, and to be able to use some of these practices to build those bridges. And I have to say, Latinos are really good at that, because we have so much diversity in our own culture. We have that sense of personalismo, that sense of loving individuals. And we also give people permission to be themselves. I have some pretty amazing people in my family. Everything from musicians to artists, because they have permission to express their talents. So I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing, and I will have your book up on our interview, and I'm going to encourage people, just put on some beautiful music and sit for a few minutes and breathe like Chris taught us to do, and keep practicing, and you'll see the changes in your life. People will come up to you like they did to Chris and say, wow, something's different. So thank you all so much for listening. Let's celebrate Latino leadership. Let's remember to prepare ourselves to be the best leaders we can be. The world not only needs us, pero es la hora. It's Latino time in America today. So let's get moving. Gracias. Te quiero.
Yes,